Oh, 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 oh.
Welcome to Multiple O's, the spin-off podcast for The O Show. The O Show is hosted by Dr. Oriana Fox, the artist with a PhD in self-disclosure. You hopefully know the spiel by now. If you're interested in candid confessions, creativity, nonconformity, and mental health, you've come to the right place. This, my friends, is season 2 of this podcast, which explores the crossover between working on the self and working to change the world. Have you ever said to yourself, I love that Oriana Fox makes art all the time? Well, if you have, now you can say it with your wallet. Go to patreon.com/Oriana Fox and support this lovely podcast and artist.
Hello, welcome to Multiple O's. I'm your host, Dr. Oriana Fox. I'm an artist with a PhD in self-disclosure. This time, it's another of the interviews from the Instagram Live series recorded in May 2021. This interview is with the author and artist Sven Butler. So we're keeping with this theme of artist-authors. Sven Butler was a mentor and an influence on Anya Boss, who we heard from previously. So it seems fitting to share this interview with Sven Butler, whose debut novel is called Cygnet, and it came out in 2020. And it's a coming-of-age story based loosely on The Ugly Duckling by Hans Christian Andersen. Butler and I spoke in depth about the book and fairy tales on a prior episode of this podcast in season 1. So this is actually the prequel. What I'm about to play for you is the prequel to that second interview, which you may have already heard in season 1. But likewise, if you haven't heard that one after you listen to this one, you can go back and listen to the follow-up interview, which was in season 1. It's a bit backwards. Anyway, all the details are in the show notes. And yeah, what do I want to say about Sven? So she wrote a debut novel, but I know about her work first and foremost as a performance artist. I've had the pleasure of witnessing her performances that have dealt with issues of race and feminism, with wit and humor, and yeah, she's a brilliant person, and I love speaking with her, and I hope you enjoy listening to me speak to her. And yeah, I introduce her more in what follows, and hopefully I've enticed you enough to listen onward without saying too much more about her now. Enjoy. I'm so thrilled to be joined by the author of this book, which is her debut novel. And I'm excited, not just because I love the book, but because I love her other work in performance. And I just feel I have so much to talk to her about. She loves The Little Mermaid. I love that movie too. She loves learning dance routines from TV shows that she watched as a child. And she's very interested in intersectional feminism, which I am too. And she is very concerned about climate change. Oh, yes, and one other thing about her that I must mention is that she's an expert in the racial empathy bias. So, without further ado, yay!
Hey, hello, I'm here.
Welcome to the O Show. Thank you so much for being here, Sven.
Oh my God, I'm thrilled.
So, how are you doing over there in Berlin? Is it good there?
It's good here. The weather report was staggeringly inaccurate today. It was supposed to just be like downpour and gloomy, and it's been a lovely Saturday. So I've been bunking off a little, had a kind of a stroll around, but I'm really good. How are you?
I'm okay. It's gray and miserable here in London, but what do you expect?
Home sweet home.
So yeah, did you hear my introduction? I
did. I loved it. Every word was like spot on.
Oh, good. Yeah. So, but I think it's important to clarify, why I'm bringing all these various topics up. So, if you could speak maybe firstly about, well, I say you like learning dance routines, and that's something I've done in my work. But in your case, you've done that with the Cosby Show, but post Bill Cosby becoming persona non grata in your piece called Happiness Forgets. So I was just wondering if you could speak a little bit about that performance.
Yeah, I was thinking about Happiness Forgets a little while ago when I was talking to someone who'd just seen the recent documentary series about Woody Allen and Woody Allen's career and these allegations, which I haven't seen the documentary, but the conversation was about this like cognitive dissonance and the difficulty this person was having. Like, well, I believe I believe survivors, and yet somehow I can't believe this. And so we had a conversation. This is not a view that I take, but Happiness Forgets came out of a depressed TV binge where I wanted to just lay my eyeballs on something that was just going to be like comforting and non-threatening and nostalgic. So I picked the Cosby Show, and as I'm kind of like maybe 60 or 70 episodes deep in this 200 episode series, was when the news really broke and the public started to really take these allegations of 50 years of rape against Bill Cosby seriously. And that meant that I was really seeing this childhood artifact of mine from a really different perspective than I had before. And so many things were already there right in front of us. And it is so interesting how these predators really hide in plain sight. And so I thought about the collusion and how we sort of dance along with these things, even as we see the harm being done right there in front of us. So I learned all of the dances from the episode openers of The Cosby Show with the help of Jamila Johnson Small, who's a brilliant choreographer.
Nice. And yeah, and how did that feel doing that? And yeah, in the midst of all that news. And how does that play out in the piece?
You know what? Actually, I think that something interesting happened where my depression started to turn to anger, and I think that in some ways that's progress. There's a little more energy, and there's a little bit more of like an outward focus in anger. But I started to take both a harder line and I wanted to introduce the sense that that good people cause harm too, and that we can't just cleave to our ideas of ourselves as good people and let that be our get out of jail free card against accountability. So I hope that what came up in the work was a good amount of wanting to hold powerful and creative people to account, and wanting us to increase our capacity for accommodating complexity.
Yeah, that seems to be something you're really, really good at, and and I think that's obviously, well, because you're very interested in doing that, and also because in being interested in it, you've spent given a lot of energy and time to studying, how to kind of, how to change people's, opinions and thoughts, and how to create nuanced representations, and which is, informed your PhD research. So I was wondering if you could speak maybe a little bit about that.
Yeah, for sure. Let me try and think of where to start. So in an early draft of the book that became Cygnet, was part of my practice-based PhD in creative writing. And so my supervisor had read the draft and had, loads of great comments. But one of them was, I wondered why racism wasn't mentioned in the book, because the protagonist is this very marginalized character in this society. I mean, the whole book is about kind of her being pushed to the margins. But you never mention racism, and she's the only one in the book who's Black. And I thought, no, she's not the only one in the book who's Black. There are other characters. But what I realized was that I hadn't said so. And so if on the page, when you don't say a Black man walked into a room, or, sort of a young Black child was this or that, when race is unqualified, then we default to the racial normative position, which is white. And so because I hadn't said what anyone else's race was, everyone else was read as white in the book. And so I got started to think about what our conventions are about naming race and marking race, and when do we do it and not do it, and why? And then, of course, I realized that we need to interrupt the conventions that we have around marking race in fiction. Need some updating.
And I agree, but also, did you feel pigeonholed by that question by your tutor a little, or was it because it was in the book? But yeah, I don't know. Did you feel like it was a kind of a comment like, "Oh, shouldn't you be writing about racism?" Or it was not nothing to do with it? Am I just am I reading into the into the comment something that wasn't there? You tell me.
I think it was a perfectly fair point, and it was one that really led to some useful investigation, because I think that the point there was, so you've got one person who's the only person who's Black, who's being told you don't belong here and we don't like you because of your identity and who you are, and so and if that had been the case, then that would have been really coy of me to oh no, I don't see race, and I didn't want that to be the case either.
Right.
And so what I needed to do was to make race more visible in the other characters. But what I wanted to disrupt is the idea that race is only mentioned in the case of racialized people, that, sort of a man walks into a room and it's just a normal man, whatever. But for us to understand this as anything other than white, then that's where racial markers come in. And I think that marking whiteness is one of the most important ways, or one of the most productively disruptive ways that we can change some of these conventions.
And so that's what you went about doing.
Yeah, well, I tried to do this in various ways. I mean, just in the same way that we don't always know how tall every character is, or the curve of their nose, or the cut of their shoulders. There's a way of being able to show the political elements of your characters without it feeling didactic or intrusive. And one of the really good early examples that I found, or not early examples, but early in my research, was the Hunger Games, where Katniss, the first person protagonist of the Hunger Games, tells us she's white on page 7, and that she's not quite as white as her mother and sisters, and hardly anybody noticed. But it's there, it's marked. And
what does she
and the racial identity
mean by not quite as white as her? I don't understand. I haven't read Hunger Games.
She has dark hair and olive skin,
okay,
which is kind of more typical of the region that she lives in, and her her mother and sister are blonde and blue-eyed, but they're slightly outliers, and there's class implications there as well.
Okay. Yeah. So you discovered that in the Hunger Games, and then what?
The reason why I discovered this in the Hunger Games was I probably would never have read the Hunger Games if it hadn't been for the Hunger Games racist tweet controversy that happened, where people who'd been fans of the book were looking forward to these films. And then when they started to notice the actors who were being cast, and indeed when the films came out, there were people who were very vocal, mostly on Twitter, about their anger at some of their favorite characters being played by Black actors, even though their characters were marked as non-white in the books. And then on the other side of the controversy as well was a bit of whitewashing. I think they cast Katniss as white as possible, when I feel like the intentionality in the book was slightly different. And another very important character, who is a young girl in the book, was always described as having dark brown skin and, sort of kind of kinkier, coilier than mine, like thick black hair. And she was played by a light-skinned mixed race, very good, very smart actor, but nevertheless, we get this lightning that happens.
This happens all the time in Hollywood, doesn't it? Yeah.
Yeah.
But anyway, so that led you to what?
We have, so that's why we have to call it. We just have to call it where we see it and call it out.
All the time. Yeah. Nina Simone biopic is the same issue. Yeah. So this Hunger Games Twitter thing that happened then led you to read the book and led you to then do what?
One of the most disturbing things about the tweets that came out around the Black characters were people saying, sort of, I'm not racist, but now that I know that this character is Black, it's not so sad when she dies. It was so strange to me. I was expecting a sweet, innocent little blonde girl, but instead I get this nappy-haired Black girl. And
I'm a bit confused by the opening of that tweet. Like, I'm not a racist, but here I go saying a really racist. Like, what is I don't understand. Like, that just is I don't know. Those two statements don't go together at all.
Yeah, I think it only works if you think that, like, literally burning a cross is like the threshold beyond which your activities become racist.
Okay, so thank you for putting it in perspective. I'm like, by what logic would that not be like a racist statement?
But the all too common logic is that, like, simply not thinking that a Black person's life and safety is I'm going to go back to the beginning of that sentence. I don't understand why people don't understand the statement Black Lives Matter in light of the fact that so many people take it for granted that it's not important to care if a Black person lives or dies, and people make these statements. And so this led me to some researchers in Italy who had discovered what they called the racial empathy gap, which is indeed a kind of neurobiological response or lack of response to the pain that someone else is experiencing. So if I saw you get cut or get hit with something, then pain centers in my brain would also fire. And but if you were Black, that response would be less so. And if I was white, seeing someone being injured who is Black, that response would be less again still.
Which is why we have all sorts of problems in the healthcare system, like or why mortality rates for women, non-white women, when they're giving birth are much higher than for white women and things like that. Yeah, it's just their pain is not taken seriously, and that has all sorts of horrible consequences.
Yeah, absolutely. And here again, we've got this question about racism, where it's like a doctor who withholds pain relief medication to a Black patient isn't necessarily doing it because they're consciously thinking, I dislike this person and I want them to be in pain. It's that they haven't been sensitized to the fact that Black people experience pain. And so this kind of all comes around to fiction because of the way that we kind of rehearse empathy through fiction. We get experience and practice being involved in the lives of others and caring about them, kind of whether we like them or not. We do get involved. I mean, when I'm reading American Psycho, I don't like Patrick Bateman, but my heart rate goes up when he's running, and I'm there with him in this human way. And so I think that the double job of kind of allowing us to empathize with and identify with more different kinds of people is one task that fiction should take seriously, and de-universalizing whiteness and bringing it into the fold of particularity along with the rest of us is another.
Absolutely. And in your book, you said earlier that the protagonist is an outsider on the island, but it's not it's not on the basis of race, it's on the basis of age. Could you talk a little bit about that decision? I mean, it's clearly related to all of that you're speaking about, but if you could just articulate that relationship.
Yeah. I was inspired a bit. Well, I mean, I was inspired by tons of stuff. I mean, one big thing is that the book Cygnet, Cygnet being the word for a young swan, it's a kind of retelling of The Ugly Duckling. Got to stay with my Hans Christian Andersen, but so I wanted to think about structures of marginalization. As well as kind of taking the normative subject out of the picture sometimes, and how do people in different minority groups kind of relate to each other and negotiate dedicated space. So we have a lot of narratives and we need them, and we need even more of them that are about kind of conflict between the dominant group and members of a subjugated group. But I also wanted to see a story where subjugated groups were there and the dominant group wasn't. And I think with age, you get something really interesting where it's not so much that you have agency at one end and no agency at the other, but there's a sort of bell-shaped curve with age where you don't have very much agency when you're young, and you get more and more and more, and then you're 18 or 21, whatever, you become a full citizen. But then towards the end of your life, your agency starts to wane away as you become less useful to the capitalist class, as you might be considered less like physically attractive by kind of standard norms or whatever. And so there's this like other kind of marginalization that happens with old age. And so I thought that this was an opportunity to write a book that didn't have any middle-aged, middle-class, straight white men in it, and one where we could see kind of people with very different identity matrices and their needs and how they negotiate taking space for themselves without any one person or one group being able to be identified as like the oppressor.
And is that's why they're situated on an island of their own?
Well, islands have great potential, and the island started out in an early draft as just a small town. But islands really, the seclusion of islands raises the stakes. It lets a space be more of a discrete society, and then also makes certain things like coming and going more difficult. And sometimes really you need those constraints for tension.
And and there is tension created on the island, but not just by human interaction, but there's also the element of the environment. Could you speak a bit about that and the role that plays in the book?
Yeah. Well, there's that saying, you don't necessarily write what you know, you write what you're obsessed with. And I was completely obsessed with the idea of writing a climate change novel. And I wanted to write one that felt, personally for me, like proximate, to sort of not happening in, the hinterlands or, somewhere far away from me. And also contemporary. And because climate change is here and now and not just there and in the future. And so I thought, okay, so who are the subjects in the global north who are imperiled by climate change right now? And it's basically the more marginalized your identity is, the more precarious, more vulnerable you are to the effects of climate change. And that goes for old people and for younger people. I think older people and younger people have different vulnerabilities. And I also wanted to intervene a bit in what I think is a really false narrative of this generation versus that generation. That generation did this to us, and I don't think that that's useful or accurate. Because it's a class thing, right? It's that the gas and oil industry knew very well 70 years ago, 100 years ago, what was coming of burning so much fossil fuel, and that they could make a lot of money from it. And so I just can't. It really makes me sad to see Anne Carson's generation, or Rachel Carson's generation, the Silent Spring generation, the people who really have been kind of throwing their backs into this for a long time, suddenly be cast as the villains in this, and it lets the real antagonists off the hook.
Yeah.
Plus, I also often really hate the way that older people, particularly older women, are portrayed in fiction, and so I wanted to get in there and write some juicy old ladies,
Nice.
and some craggy old ladies, and some jiggly old ladies, and some older people who aren't gentlemen or ladies, whatever.
Excellent. Yeah. So you want to kind of produce, a story that enables lots of different people to kind of identify with the characters. And what do you? I guess everyone, every artist kind of wants to, have an impact. And so I guess I'm just asking a really stupid question of what are you hoping people are going to get? What are you hoping people are going to get out of this book?
Well,
how is it going to change their lives? Tell us.
What I'd hope is, I do want, lots of different people to identify with the characters in the book, but that's not why I made the characters diverse. I want everyone to get used to identifying with minoritized people, because I think that when we have any kinds of works of fiction and culture where a white male is at the center, then that's a universal story that anyone can enjoy. And then there are women's stories, and then there are Black stories, and then there are disabled stories. No, I want I want us to get used to having these having non-male and non-white characters be empathizable, and for their deaths to be grievable, and for their triumphs to be celebratable, and not just during Black History Month and when we're supposed to take our medicine. So I guess what I want is for lots of different people to identify with lots of different people.
Yeah, I think that's a really good goal. But yeah, so I kind of want to go back to the Bill Cosby piece, and the just how complicated your relationship to that material becomes because of that layer of race. I don't know if you can articulate something about that dynamic.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that this becomes really heartbreaking at times. It's really an emotional thing, but I think that it is so necessary for us, for all of us, for everyone to hold members of our own communities to account. I was listening to a talk by a really brilliant psychoanalyst who is, I think, one of the directors of the Freud Museum. And I'm just putting in all of this preamble because I'm going to paraphrase him, and I wish I could I could also credit him. But I hope everyone will try and find this talk. He talks about the difficulty in growing up as a Black person when you kind of can't castrate you can't kill the already castrated father. That you see that your elders have gone through and go through so much, and then like what you want to step to them, like it makes it a really complicated journey to kind of depose the generation above you and come into your own. And that's sometimes what it can feel like because I don't want Bill Cosby to be shamed, and I don't want his legacy to be destroyed like this. Unfortunately, he did it, and but I also feel that we can't let that sadness keep us from saying, no, this remains unacceptable, and we're not going to achieve a different kind of status in the world by saying we'll just let anything slide, and certainly not by serving up Black women as kind of human sacrifices to Black male excellence. So it was really sad, and it's important as well that that we know that abuse isn't a one-note monotone thing. There's always kindness, and there's always some consideration. There's always exceptions. There's always this, and I think that we can't defer to that. So I'm into accountability and us all getting better together rather than letting folks off the hook, which can make you a real killjoy. So, but I'll be the killjoy.
I don't have my card on me. My feminist, card. I'm a card carrying feminist, but I don't have my card with me. But it says killjoy on it.
Yeah, I mean,
yeah.
I didn't send a congratulation card to Kamala Harris, but I hope she's having a perfectly nice time in her new role.
So So you were mentioning being depressed and turning it into anger, and actually, it just reminded me of this thing my dad says, which is that depression is anger turned inward. So I agree that turning it outward is definitely kind of a positive move. But I'm just wondering, like, how else does your work, or maybe that piece, or other artworks you've made, or the book, how has it impacted on your life, or has it affected you and your, I don't know, way of being in the world or anything like that?
Yeah, I mean, it's such a toughie. I have a friend who's a really brilliant writer and stopped writing in a very empowered way, and he told me that he stopped writing because it hurts too much, and it does. I mean, I'm not saying this for everyone. I'm sure some people don't feel this way, but it does for me. And you have to kind of create a person that you love enough to know them inside and out, and then hurt them and keep making bad things happen to them so that they can grow. And it's just like it can sometimes feel a little bit Old Testament. And sometimes I have to take really long breaks. I've got something that I've been working on, and it's been sitting aside for 6 months, and I'm like just about ready to get started with it again. But I find it hard. I know that some people have a bit more of I don't know, like kind of Snow White cleaning the cottage sort of writing day, but it's hard for me. Was that kind of
It's hard for you, but does that lead to any kind of catharsis, or is there like a silver lining to any of that?
Oh, right. Okay.
I mean,
it's
it doesn't have to be like, don't feel like you have to sugarcoat anything for us. Just curious.
and the thing is, I guess, I feel like with performance, I would make a performance and kind of like present it or tour it or whatever, and then there would be a point where I didn't really sort of perform that anymore. And maybe because this is my first book, I sort of don't know how long the tail is yet. You sort of like, you write it, you shop it around, you get rejected. You go through drafts, you shop it around, it gets picked up. You go through drafts, so you send it out. You have, you do readings. There are things to kind of, there are still things to do. Like there's still labor attached to this book. And I'm interested to find out when it's going to feel finished.
Right.
But maybe that's
and also it came out in 2020, so like the time, I mean, were you going to be like touring around and stuff physically, and then that got shut down into being digital events?
Well, I was lucky that the hardback came out in 2019, so
Okay.
so I was able to get to some places. And like the US edition is coming out in paperback in a couple of months. And so, yeah, I'm not going to be able to jet anywhere. And in some ways, that's really fine with me. I'm a real behind the scenes kind of kid these days. But it is really good to be able to talk to readers and to do readings and kind of put the book in someone's hand. That's a really cool thing.
Yeah. So it's really interesting, like, to talk to someone who's operating in these different realms, and who has this knowledge of, like, the way these things, very different things, meet audiences. It's like with a live performance, you see the audience's reaction. Here on Instagram, we can't, some people put hearts and stuff or whatever, or wave, but we don't know how they're reacting. And then with a book,
what's wonderful about it is that it gets sent out potentially to, much wider audiences, but you don't have that same connection. And yeah, so how does that, how do you feel about all that? Like, which is better? You said you're kind of behind the scenes. What is that about? Have you always been that way? And is performing like I don't know, a stretch, or is it something that comes naturally? Or you could talk about that.
Yeah, well, I mean, the temporality of having a book in the world is weird to me. Just that, like, somebody could be reading it right now, and I'm not even there. Being behind the scenes does not come naturally to me, or rather, is not how I've always been. I've really been a sort of like on stage kind of person, and I think that the way that I write, I really need like intense solitude, real quiet. I don't like to write near a window because I'll just stare out the window. And so I think writing and performance are really good foils for me because I can make a performance relatively quickly. It tends to be the element of collaboration and performance starts quite soon on, and the moment of the appearance of the work and the audience's reception of the work are coterminous, and so there's it feels faster and more immediate and kind of bigger and more open. And writing is slow. It's so slow.
It's slow. Yeah, I know exactly what you mean. But yeah, it must be, I don't know. But I guess it has different gatekeepers as well, like very different kinds of gatekeepers. Or institutions that support it, or enable the distribution of these things. Like, how is it like dealing with those gatekeepers or those distribution means, those institutions?
I've got a shout out to my publisher, Charmaine Lovegrove, and her imprint Dialogue Books, which is an imprint of Little Brown, because that experience has been awesome for me in all the ways that I was told that it would not be awesome as a female debut novelist. And this is really because the head of the imprint, Charmaine, has a sense of an ethical sense of how to produce a book, and so I was involved with decisions that I was always told that I would have no, like they wouldn't even seek my opinion on like the cover, for example. I was able to choose the actor who read the audiobook. I feel that I was incredibly well supported from the publisher, but I think that it's a shame that that's not typical, and I think it's a shame that sort of people who design the covers of books usually don't have time to read them. They really only have time to read a synopsis, and that wasn't the case with mine. And so I'm still getting to know. You know what? That's a lie. I'm not getting to know it. I turn up and I kind of improvise when I have to be in these kind of literary and like publishy spheres. I don't even know what it's called. The literary world. What is it?
The literary world. Yeah, sure. That sounds right.
Yeah, I go there and I act like I'm a writer, and I think that they fall for it.
Like you are a writer.
I mean, I know how. Like, I own pens, so.
You've written a book. I think that's.
That old thing.
I've done a PhD. I mean, you're a writer. You write
Okay.
the you write the performance. I don't know if it's all improvisational or script based or what. There's something written in that as well. I know. Yes. But so yeah, that's funny. But yeah, so can I ask? I think obviously, some people say everything an artist makes is autobiographical. I was wondering if you could speak about what is autobiographical about this book, if you don't mind sharing.
Yeah. I mean, the most important autobiographical element in this book is that the kid, the protagonist of Cygnet, and I both make an amazing apple pie. So that's where I start.
I thought you were just going to leave it at that and just be like, "Fuck you, Oriana." I'm not going to tell you anything about my life.
And the rest
You make apple pie.
has
That's it.
no resemblance to any people living or dead. I have, let me see.
You were saying before, like you write these characters and you have to kind of torture them. So I was wondering if any of those torturous moments, were things that you yourself have been through, or was it cathartic? To write yourself into some aspects of the work.
But it is very handy to use your own kind of past torture, so that you don't have to just sort of innovate them like sort of constant Marquis de Sade's. But I found it really helpful because the book is very voice driven, and I looked at my journals and notebooks that I kept as a teenager to kind of get a sense of my voice then, and also what some of my preoccupations were, and so my voice definitely influenced the voice in the book. I tried to change the accent a little bit so that her voice didn't sound like my voice in my head. So that was handy. And it's fun to actually mine your past for experiences. I mean, my mother is an herbalist, and there's a scene where the protagonist and her mother are foraging, and so some of the sort of particularities of their dynamic weren't the same, but that was definitely how I learned to identify edible and medicinal plants. And I think this a general feeling of insecurity, and the sense of that term "safe as houses" feeling like a real fucking joke, is something that I live with. And I think that there are some people that I know who recognize themselves in the book, but I'll leave that between them and their avatars.
Yeah. I find that that's often where people draw the line about talking about themselves, is when it intersects with other people, having to tell something about another person. Yeah. So, what was I going to ask you? Oh, yeah. So you have these obviously like political aims with your work, but what do you think? I don't know what my question is. It's something about like, I started the week talking to Lena Simic because she's an activist, and I was saying how I'm kind of a bit of an armchair activist. So I'm just wondering, do you think of yourself as an activist in any way, or is your work?
I mean, I used to be. This is a really good question. This is an interesting question that that I like to consider, and that I don't really feel I have an answer to, because like I'm not sure that writing fiction with a political agenda necessarily constitutes activism. But I also wouldn't swear on a stack of Bibles that it doesn't. I think that it's an interesting thing for us to consider. Because in some ways there's a kind of a pool of the readership for literary fiction that's not necessarily That's not necessarily going to mobilize the masses. But I suppose that it could. There's always that potential. But I think that maybe I don't consider this book, for all of its kind of political aims and its political infusion, to be activism, because I knew what I was going to say when I started that sentence, but now I'm getting close to the middle. But I have considered myself an activist
That
in the
happens
past.
to me all the time. It's nice to see it happen to a guest, actually, because I feel like that happens to me constantly. It happened to me with like the first or second question I asked you. I was like, where am I going? I knew I had a place. Anyway, go on.
Yeah, right. But there's still some good stuff in here. It's about glamour and authorship, and so I think that a lot of the really important work in activism is, and not always, of course, but like the direct action, the boots on the ground stuff, and the organizing work. So the folks who stand there passing out the leaflets, and that's often not the folks who are the featured speaker, sort of the person with their name on the front of a book. And I think that it's a shame that a lot of political folks with a profile aren't so willing, once they get that profile, to do the grunt work. It's beyond a shame. I think it's super hypocritical. But and then there's the care work. There's the sort of feeding kids before school, and doing the menial tasks it takes to keep the free clinic running, and so whether or not stuff is called activism, I hope that we do what we do in a spirit of goodwill and with the conviction that that all walls can fall down if we're pushing against them in strategic and collective ways.
And so, what you're implying is that we should maybe not have a hierarchy around it, recognize the little things. But at the same time, you're also saying that you weren't quite sure that writing a book was activism. So I'm trying to
Yeah. I'm skeptical if I could call this work my activist work from beginning to end, and so, but maybe. And I also think that folks should do what they can, and folks should do what they're good at in support of the world that they want to live in, and that they feel that their neighbors deserve to live in too. And so, there wouldn't really be much point in mobilizing me as like a guerrilla fighter. And I'm not saying that no one should be a guerrilla fighter. I'm saying I might not be the man for the job. I might be, sort of the person who's a little bit more of a bit more suited to writing a book that excludes middle-aged, middle-class, straight white men.
Right,
a little more in my wheelhouse.
Yeah. That's good. Yeah. So we each have our own maybe part to play in the revolution.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. That's nice. I like that. That's good. I want to ask you a question about language since you're a writer. But also I've noticed, like listening to you talk on podcasts and all this different places. So you like the word folks. You use the word folks a lot.
Do I? Oh, wow.
Yeah. It's funny. People are not always aware of the words that they use all the time. Like with Jet Moon, they love constellation. And I love constellation too, so maybe that's why I picked up on it. But anyway, you tend to use non-white. And I was wondering, like, if there were kind of reasons behind, or if there's a preference there for non-white versus, like, maybe people of color, or I don't know. Do you have any thoughts about those terms?
Yeah. I'm trying to see where, let's see, the discourse at the moment around what kind of language feels sort of accurate, inclusive, and fostering solidarity, and what kind of language erases or serves to foster like false equivalencies. And so kind of terms like politically black, people of color, BAME have come into the discourse as kind of potentially flattening difference in ways that are unhelpful. And I don't necessarily think that's the case. I mean, like, BAME's one that I never really warmed to, but I think that that's because I encountered it in certain contexts. But
I feel like it's a very UK-centric term, maybe. I don't know.
Yeah.
But so maybe for like the American listeners or viewers, could you just say what it is? Because, yeah, I think it's a UK-focused thing.
Yeah, I think that's right. See, I never know because I never go to the US anymore.
I get confused myself. I think it is, but I'm not sure because I'm not in America. But I think it might be.
I would imagine so. So it's an acronym, BAME, for Black, Asian, and Minority Ethnic, and so there's all sorts of kind of weird things contained within that you can really oppose. I mean, for one thing, is we're talking about people who are a global majority, and also the experience of sort of African diasporic people, as in Black and Asian people, in the UK are quite kind of distinctive, though there are these overlaps. There's something that feels warm and fuzzy to me about folks. There's something that speaks love in that word. And there's something that speaks, for me, like pre-coloniality in that word. Sort of who we were before the stank of Enlightenment racial science got all over us. And so I do like folks. And in some ways, when I say folks, like, I like folks more, even though they're the same like flesh towers that they had been if I called them, people or citizens. Although I like citizens too, but I just don't say it as much. And also, I'm not going to start saying it because I think that will be terrible. Because I'm not wanting to exclude people who. I mean, I'm living in a country now where I'm not a citizen. And non-white. What non-white gives us the power to do is to talk about marginality across contexts. And so, like, for example, I had some literature that was like a kind of flyer for a project that I was working on that was to support Black artists, and we were defining Black as politically Black, like, if I had written the flyer, it would have said something different, but it said, sort of politically Black means ethnic minority people, including people of like African, Asian, South American, blah, blah, blah descent. And so I handed this flyer to someone in Japan, and this Yamato Japanese man said, "So you're telling me I'm Black?" And it was like, you'll see, because in in this context, no, that person was not Black. That person was like the racial norm. And in Japan, there are kind of 6 major other groups that make up the largest ethnic minority groups. But this person, as a Yamato Japanese, was not Black. But an Okinawan would be non-white in that context, or an Ainu, an ethnically Ainu person would be non-white in that context. So I think that's what non-white gives you the power to express.
I see. Okay. Yeah. And so yeah, but what about people of color? Like, I don't think I've heard you use that one too much. Do you object to that one on some basis? Or I've heard certain people saying they dislike it because, I guess, on the basis of, well, I'm speaking specifically about Ope Lori, the artist, lens-based artist. I don't know if you know her work, but she says she doesn't like people of color because the people of white, like, there's an absurdity to it, or I'm probably going to butcher her explanation of why she dislikes it so much. But yeah, so we both agreed we were going to start calling people of white.
Oh yeah, I mean, like, the white.
I'm a person of white.
Is also good. Okay. Yeah. I mean, people of color doesn't bother me. Yeah, I use it sometimes. BIPOCs and cutie pox. It's all good.
Anyway,
I mean, mostly I just like to call folks what they like to be called.
Yeah, that's the most important thing, isn't it? Yeah. Self-definition and respecting people's self-definition is probably the best, the ideal. Yeah. How much time have we been talking here?
I don't know.
Oh my goodness, it's already 5.
Oh my God, time flies.
Yeah. We didn't talk about The Little Mermaid.
So we have to make time to get back onto this because these are the issues that matter.
What, The Little Mermaid?
Yeah. That all of that.
You're joking.
Look, I mean, I love many incarnations of The Little Mermaid, The Little Sea Maid. All sorts of exchanges for body parts and chimera. Yeah, I'm into it, and we should discuss it at length.
Yes, let's do that. Thank you so much, Susan. It's been a pleasure. I know everyone else feels the same way.
It was really great to talk to you. Thank you for inviting me.
Okay. Bye. Bye, everyone.
So that concludes the prequel interview with Susan Butler. If you want more, go back to season 1 when I speak in depth with Susan again following this interview that you just listened to. We did a follow-up where we talk a lot more about the book, Cygnet, and we talk about The Little Mermaid and Hans Christian Andersen fairy tales. And yeah, it's great. Once again, I hope that this has piqued your interest in her work, and you can check it out on her website, susanbutler.com, of course. So, and also, more details of everything are in the show notes, as always.
Next time on Multiple O's.
Next time on Multiple O's, I have a brand spanking new interview. It's very exciting with the artist and author, yet again, an artist and author, Dawn Woolley. But this time she's written a nonfiction book, an academic book, a kind of sociological book that you wouldn't expect to have been written by an artist, except that it's her artwork on the cover and her artwork used as illustrations within the book. But the book is called Consuming the Body, Capitalism, Social Media, and Commodification. And it's being published on the 6th of October. No matter how you feel about selfies, if you love them or hate them, this next episode is for you, because the book analyzes different types of selfies and even suggests pleasurable ways of taking part in self-expression online that evade commodification and defy capitalism's all too often sadistic demands. If you don't know what I'm talking about, you should listen to it anyway. And as always, I'm asking if you could please like and subscribe and give feedback. And if you're touched or moved to do so, I'd love to hear from you. Feedback is always welcome. You can write to me at studio@orianafox.com. And even if you don't, I'll go on accepting myself, my life, and other people unconditionally, because we're all just fallible human beings. Thanks for listening.
Oh.